The address we are about to hear is in memory of Garth Boomer. He was noted for his intellect, his energy, wit and humour. In AATE's history, Garth Boomer's place is notable. Words of wisdom from his writings continue to be quotable. It's now by design. We'll hear a talk from Mary Kalantzis and Bill Cope. Their fame as such, we can be sure, to be all you folk could hope. Though they now reside in Illinois, they built repute down under, and we know that their links to Oz will not completely sunder. They're known for multicultural, multiliteracies and learning by design, and when they're done, you'll think your choice of this keynote was just fine. The address we are about to hear is titled New Media and New Learning for Teaching Insights on the Digital World I know many have been yearning. This conference features several pairs, two sisters and Doug Fisher twice, and now an educational dynamic duo, double value for one price. Ladies and gentlemen, Professors Kalantzis and Cope.
Thank you for a very Australian introduction. The Americans tend to be, I was taught in America that you had to say something very nice about somebody and then said, have you considered also? But in Australia, we are fulsome and embracing, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I want to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of this land, and I think you challenged us to say who were the peoples of the land. I wasn't born in Sydney, but the Aurora people are the people of Sydney, and so I also want to acknowledge them as per your encouragement. I also want to say that Bill and I have been away now for about a decade, and so it's a privilege to be back. Thank you to the organisers for wanting to include us. And I have to say, why did we leave? I've been thinking about this as I've been listening. Why did we leave? We didn't apply for a job in America, we were recruited. But one of the reasons that we did leave is that we were seeing that Australians who were punching above their weight, inventing the world, being above the rest of the world in education, were always looking outside, looking to America, looking to England, and usually taking the worst of what was there and making it mandatory if they possibly could do it. But we resisted mandatory. That was one of the good things about Australia. We resisted mandatory and we remained creative. We continue in that spirit, and the work that Bill and I are going to share with you is grounded firmly in Australia and continues to be developed with folks here. And in fact, it was Rita Van Haren on behalf of the organisation who asked us to come, and because we've been working with the Lanyon cluster for 15 years now, more than that, and as co-researchers, the principals and the teachers there are co-researchers with us and have contributed significantly to the things that we're going to share with you today. So we've never been away. Partly what we're going to say, anywhere where you are together with the world, and that's kind of one of the new affordances. But the other thing is, I noticed when I looked through the program, I didn't recognise all the names. There's so many new and young people, and really I think our own story is one of collaboration. We've always been collaborators. That's how you're able to make a difference in a small country and also in a big country. So our presentation was not our work over the many years has not only been to ask why, though we need to ask that, and we've had some very good questions posed so far, but the next part is how. How do you respond? What do you do? How do you go out there and try something out? And we will share that history with you. And I know Garth Boomer, the man that we are recognising, is a very handsome fellow. You've taken his picture down. But he was a very powerful man in our country at the time when we were moving towards progressivism, asking a new lot of whys and hows, and he was key in that. And for us, the fact that he asked us to negotiate curriculum was important, not just to take what was given, but to negotiate. And the other thing that was important that he gave us, and which we're grateful and continue to work with, was the idea that teachers and students live in learning and teaching environments. We live there. We don't just learn there or teach there. So routines and other things like that are not of value in themselves unless they take on board how we live together and what kind of spaces we create for that. So I just by way of introduction, just to give you a little potted history of the journey that took us to what the new how that we're going to show you now. But way back in the 80s, we started with something called social literacy, which was then talking about language across the curriculum. And I remember Garth was a bit critical about that at that time. He thought anything that was kind of specified and didn't come from the negotiation was not going to deliver the kind of results that were needed. But at that time, we were integrating language with authentic discipline domains in social studies and about social inclusion and social cohesion. We were working with the Catholic Education Office, with Wollongong University in the western suburbs, with the Redfern Indigenous communities, and with rural New South Wales. I just want to mention some people that maybe have been forgotten, but Essie Coffey then was from Walgett and a leader in her field. Mum Shirl, who was an inspiration in Redfern at the time. It is important. I know this conference has named the Indigenous domain as an important domain, but no one can be a literacy educator in Australia without continuing the partnership with Indigenous peoples. We can't say we are grateful for their land and what they've given us without walking hand in hand with Indigenous people in the ways that they want to address the way in which they are Australians in their own country. We moved from that to genre theory again, working with Indigenous and local communities. We were at UTS, worked with a disadvantaged schools program, and I want to thank people who are not here, but one of them's here, I think, but Jim Martin and Gunter Kress and Joan Rothery and Mary Mackin, now with a married name, Peter Knapp and Megan Watkins, all of whom contributed to the work that we did for the Powers of Literacy. We then moved on to multiliteracies because we figured that we were all making our names with all kinds of ideas, but the gaps were getting bigger and we needed to leave our names behind and get together as a group. And the New London group was formed with that purpose. How do we address the future and what do we need to do without being Alan or Carmen Luke or Jim G or Gunter Kress or Courtney Kasdan or Norman Fairclough or Sarah Michaels or Martin Ackeder. We left that at the door and tried to struggle with what multiliteracies might mean and what the future, the designs for social future might involve, and I'll say more about that in a minute. And then after that, we moved to learning by design, again, specifically with RMIT and the Lanyon Cluster through some RRC grants. Mary Neville, Anne Clunan, Rita Van Haren, Nicola Yellen were just some of the people that we work with. And we did it on the smell of an oil rag. That's one thing we've discovered. We get an ARC grant, $150,000 over 3 years. Whoopee. What can you do with that? It's just so hard. I know the money has increased, but for the kind of work that we need to do, we just kind of don't fund it. But nonetheless, we do breakthrough work in Australia. And then we moved to UIUC on an invitation to participate in that country. And partly we thought if we could get with good people there, we might be part of a process that mitigates some of the effects of what was happening there with No Child Left Behind and high stakes testing and teacher evaluation, all that kind of stuff that was going on there. And there we moved to kind of trying to realise the values that we understood about engagement and transformation by exploring a new technology, and we could do it because there we got $5 million, not $150,000. We got to work with people across the university, Nobel Prize winners and philosophers and computer scientists, all willing to participate in wanting to think. I think, as Peter Freebody said, how do we prepare people for the next, for what's coming in the future? And there we invented something called Scholar, and Bill's going to talk to you about that. We got involved in MOOCs, the free open education, and tried to test what's there. At the moment, I'm recruiting people in big data to figure out that last thing that Peter Freebody talked about, how do we get longitudinal data? How do we continue to collect data? The students working in the cloud, working in these spaces, affords us the opportunity of knowing every click. Those little kids eating the phone, we're going to know if their face is there or their finger's there and what they did with it. So the possibilities before us are extraordinary. And our next piece of work, we've been waiting for this to happen a long time, and it kind of hasn't, and needs to happen if we're going to talk about multiliteracies, is how do you get a grammar using that word loosely, of the multimodal, so that our teachers can really engage, not in an accidental way, but in a purposeful way. And we have a work with Cambridge University on that. And as I said, the big data assessment regimes. We recognized when we went to America, unless we could tackle assessment, unless you changed what assessment was, you weren't going to change curriculum. You know, because assessment determines so much. And we still think that that is an important thing to be doing, and that's the next thing that we'll be tackling. So just before I turn to the prepared PowerPoint, I want to just sort of say how difficult the field that we're in is, but kind of pick up on some of the things that I've heard already. You might have heard of Kyle Wyman. He's a Nobel Prize winner, a physicist who won the Nobel Prize for the work that they did with the Bose-Einstein condensate, you know, where they were splitting atoms. Anyway, he's into education in the engineering, and in 1914, I think, at AERA, he said this. And he was talking about what it is to be a researcher in education. He said that he found it fun, a lot of fun to be working in education because there's so much unplowed ground, so many unanswered questions, and so many potential experiments and possible surprises. Of course, he says, in some respects, doing educational research is harder. For example, he said, we know a lot more about the contextual influences on the behavior of atoms than on students, and hence what contextual elements do and do not have to be controlled in designing experiments. And so that's picking up where Peter left off about the nature of what we bring to learners in the living and learning experience. So to turn to the work that we've prepared for you today. Is that going to go up there? Do I have to do anything? Oh, right. So look, I've done it. Well, somebody did it, so thank you. I did it, all right. So for us, always learning has been about the learner. That's why the word transformation is there. It's about how the learner becomes, in terms of knowledge, skills, and sensibilities, the same kinds of things that Peter was talking about and others. It's not about one thing, it's about those integrated things. Have they become somebody who can do math, a particular math, or history, or understand, or collaborate? So transformation is always the purpose of the work that we do, and we have to have means of understanding that in all of our endeavours. And in the work of the Learning by Design, there were three key elements that influenced us, and I'm not going to go to this in any depth because we do want to get to the work that we're doing now in realizing these principles in the digital environment. But of course, the three key elements that I think most of the aggregated research continues to tell us matter. The first one, of course, is diversity, and that's just about individual difference. And it can mean everything from disability to cultural and ethnic backgrounds to how you feel about any particular kind of place. But every single educator has to understand identity, individual identity, and how you engage learners and transform them. In Australia, we did a wonderful job in addressing these issues with anti-racism strategies, multicultural strategies, inclusive education, you name it. We've had a whole range of words, but we understood that our classrooms are made up of individuals with different sensibilities, different orientations, different senses of belonging, and we had to understand each one of those aspects of them in order to harness them and able to transform them. Secondly, multiliteracies. I think it's undeniable, those last pictures that Peter showed of his grandchildren over those devices, any kind of device now. It's not the device that matters. It's not a computer. It's not a phone. At our university, they're preparing kind of bits of material that you can roll up and put in your pocket and refresh. I mean, the changes in the technology are enormous. But synesthesia, when children first come to us in their early grades, they come in and they want to talk, they want to jump, they want to touch, they want to draw, they want to behave in multiple modes of communication. And what do? we take them and we try to mold them grade by grade by grade, of stripping all that out so that we end up with alphabetical literacy only at the end point. And you've heard all the critiques about that. What does that do to somebody when you say all those other modes do not matter, when they matter in everyday life, but yet in the school context, you know, we take them to the sacred text in alphabetical literacy. So synesthesia, is the possibility of it returning with the new digital technologies is enormous for us. All of us use it. I don't know, I've been away for a week. I've been communicating with my office. I've been communicating with my relatives, and I do it with pictures, right? With maybe a caption. And I certainly never ring them up. You know, it's impolite now to ring somebody up. You do it, you know, you think about it yourself, because you interrupt them and they want to do it in their own way. So the digital environment has produced extraordinary opportunities for meaning making. And why? And this is the most important point. It's because the manufacturing of those modalities is done with the same unit of manufacture. That's the digit. You click for an image, you click for any kind of symbolic thing, you click for audio. So the manufacturing of meaning has actually been made available to all of us, including those tiny little babies, you know, by moving and shaping to be able to get before what you needed whole industries to produce audio, whole industries to produce typography and whatever, whole industries to produce images. There's a radical, radical revolution, and we as people who create the conditions for people to learn how to make meaning, because that's what literacy is. How do you make meaning in the world? You know, that hand that was open and somebody was taught to write, which was the last little image, it's making meaning in these multiple forms. We have to be able to harness these in ways that are productive and transformative for learners. But the third one, and I think Garth would be smiling, I think he smiles every time we talk about pedagogy, is the role of pedagogy, explicit understanding of the choices that one makes in terms of the instructional habits and activities that we engage learners with. What are the knowledge processes? And I'm going to say this, and I think many people will say this also, teachers need to be prepared with repertoires. If we accept the point 1 and point 2, which are all about diversity, there is no single pedagogy. There is no best way that is universally so, that can be prescribed and made mandatory. We do need to have repertoires too, and that teachers are intellectuals, teachers are professionals, teachers are researchers. They're not public servants that are given something from above and they turn the page. We got over that a long time ago, but somehow you get the latest OECD results that says there's a few drops in points and bang, people want to make something mandatory. You want to test your teachers, you want to test your kids, you want to slap something that might work in one small place across all of them, and forgetting that what made Australia a great country and had a wonderful education system was the freedom we had in the classroom, the freedom to make choices and make decisions, and preparing teachers with creativity and repertoire. So each one of these elements involves choices and differentiation. Each one of them requires that we consider the individual, we consider the pair or the group or the class or the topic, that we are able to differentiate, able to know what to bring to the activity and to the purpose. So the teacher as a designer of learning experiences and an educational professional is key in our thinking about literacy. We can't give them a teacher-proof curriculum. We can't give them any scaffolding that's going to work for every child. And the learner with agency, we know without being engaged, you can create fear in a child in order to repeat what you want them to do. But that doesn't mean that that is going to be sustained into the long term and be applied in contexts that are useful to them. The learner has to be a co-designer of their learning. And of course, the technological choices and the learning ecologies we produce are important. This is a learning ecology that we've got to know and we're familiar with, and we're all trained to behave in this way, and it has its use, but it won't have its use for everything. And I have no idea what's behind. You're sitting there. You're here, I presume you're here because you know something about what you think you're going to get, but how you feel and how you respond and whether it's meaningful or has had any transformative effect, I know nothing about that. So what's the purpose of the lecture, right? You could stay home and read a book, right? Any book, you know, my book, somebody else's book, but we're here. So we have to think about what this is effective for, what are the efficiencies here, what would work with something else. So learning by design, I think, is one of the key things that we've been working with now for many years, and the design principle is now, at least in my university, becoming kind of a universal idea for all curriculum, whether you're in engineering or physics or education or arts or whatever. How do we design it? And the idea of that rigorous curriculum is not based on some disciplinary principles is not sufficient. It's a starting point, but it's not sufficient. So I just want to, for a minute, say something about this framework that we put together as part of the MultiLiteracy's work. I think you can understand it for yourself. The only point I want to make here again is the debates. I have to say I force myself to read the debates that are going on in Australia at the moment, and word for word, they're the same as they've been for decades. I cannot believe we're still arguing about phonics. I cannot believe we're still arguing about process writing or whole writing. I cannot believe that these things are arguments. They're all, in their own right, useful processes, including systemic functional linguistics, critical literacy, you name it. There's a whole range of methods and approaches that have use in particular purposes. But a teacher needs to know when to use which one and for what purposes and for how long, right? To know when experiential learning matters, when you have to immerse somebody in what they know or perhaps introduce something new, when you have to move to abstraction and to conceptualization, when you move to critically thinking, well, what's the purpose of this bit of knowledge? Why do I need to know this formula? And of course, how do I create it? How do I apply it appropriately, whether it's for any kind of assessment purposes or otherwise, or how do I apply it creatively? And including, I think, not just the arguments that we've had between traditional grammar and explicit or systemic linguistics or applied or English as a second language, or I think you call it now as an additional language, or bilingualism or evidence-based reading and writing. All of this stuff is useful and non-useful, depending on the individual, depending on the subject matter, depending on the outcome, and the professional needs to track the effect of that input and the outcome in terms of the students' goals and in terms of their goals. Now, the high-stakes testing put frameworks on us that don't allow us to have that flexibility, and Australia needs to resist that. When I turned up in Urbana-Champaign, one of the most progressive books there was something called Backward Design. And I was told it was the book used by most Americans. It was a progressive book. And what it did, it went to the high-stakes testing items and then backward designed the curriculum to that item. So the testing, it was a testing determined by somebody outside of the system. Then they wondered, after they did all the drill and kill and the 2 hours of literacy and the 2 hours of math, why the gaps are still there and why the gaps are getting wider and why students in rich schools, students in middle-class schools did nothing associated with No Child Left Behind. They didn't even do the high-stakes testing. They didn't do any of this stuff. The teachers were creative. They went and did art. They went and did sport. They went and did the living part was really mattered. And the poor and the minorities, we forced these systems on them that made their life a misery for them as well as their families. So just to end, to integrate these ideas about design, about multimodality, about diversity, about teachers as designers and co-designers, about making explicit decisions about pedagogy, about sharing and collaborating with teachers are all integral to the kind of frameworks, to the how that we've been focused on for many years and been working with schools across a number of countries. But now we've moved to the digital and say, what are the affordances of the digital for those values? How can the affordances provide us with ways of achieving those goals when the one teacher and the 20 kids in that box cannot deliver? So we've arrived at that point now, and we are testing the tools that we've been able to create in America, both in America and here. And Bill is going to take you on a journey and explain to you the way in which the affordances of the new technology, we believe, are one way to address some of the desires we've all had collectively and individually. So I'll hand over to him now.
Okay, so what is this on now? Yeah. You can hear me okay? Yeah. I'm going to do something very practical now. Mary's done this big picture kind of a view of things that we've been talking about for a whole long while. I'm going to show you now into some kids' work, and I'm going to have some children talk to you and have some teachers talk to you, and I'll try to make some big generalizations as I go along the way. But I'm going to start with a counterpoint. I want to contrast what's happening here with what we would call traditional pedagogy, and I want to do a volcanoes lesson with you if you don't mind. So here we are, I'm the teacher, I'm out the front, and I'm looking down over the classroom. And I say to you, okay kids, we're going to do volcanoes, and there are the kids reading their book about volcanoes, let's say. This, by the way, happens just as a piece of personal trivia to be the school and the village where Mary was born. I took these pictures, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago or something, in Greece. The classroom really, where we're going to do this volcanoes work, it's a 19th century invention. And it's sort of all we had until recently, and we set up a lot of patterns of interaction between teacher and student, students and texts, students and each other. We set up those patterns. So here we are in the classroom, and now I'm looking the other way. I'm the student, and I'm looking up to the teacher on his little stage there. So you can see that a kind of a knowledge architecture's been set up, and a set of textual architectures have been set up as well. See the books on the desk? Well, here we are, the book on the desk, and we're all doing chapter 7, which is about volcanoes, and we're all on the same page at the same time. And in a way, what we have to do in a classroom, Courtney Kasdan uses this quite lovely obscure word, exophoric reference. We're referring to everything in the outside world. There are no volcanoes in the classroom, and we can refer to anything and everything in the outside world, and there it is in the book. The teacher and the book bring the outside world into the classroom. And now for a theory of learning, this is how learning happens. See the textbook there, you've got your finger on the page, and over here you're writing notes, and between this finger and this finger, something gets remembered. Something you're told gets remembered. So, but in a way, I'm being a little bit facetious, but it's partly true. In traditional didactic pedagogy, it's about stuff that individuals can remember. Very little social interaction. It's the stuff you can keep in your head. It's actually a focus on cognition, to be quite frank. So here I am looking over the classroom now, and that little girl's put her head up, and what are you thinking? You're the teacher. What are you thinking? The little girl's got her head up, and maybe she's thinking seriously about volcanoes, but something terrible happens. This wasn't designed for this. It's about individual knowledge, my relationship with the text, my own work that I hand in. I do my writing, I hand it in, the teacher marks it. And one of the, and of course at the end there's the test to see what we can remember. So I'm using this as a kind of a counterpoint for what we might do, which may be different. So here's if you like, a very simple model of what we call didactic pedagogy, a kind of a hub and spoke model. The teacher hands out the textbook, the teacher talks, the students don't interact with each other, and there we go. And how does technology change this? Well, the answer is it doesn't necessarily change anything. So here's a list of things where we can do exactly the same thing that we did in that didactic classroom. The flipped classroom, okay, the teacher talks. What's the difference when you put it on a video? The teacher's still talking. The e-textbook, okay, that was chapter 7 there, but chapter 7 happens in the e-textbook, and there's a little quiz down the end where you get right and wrong answers. The architecture of the learning management system, which transmits out content, well, how's that different? Not necessarily. Procedure-based intelligent tutors, clickers, where the kids give answers. The electronic whiteboard, you know, there was a blackboard, and now there's a whiteboard. Now, of course, these things are different in some ways, but in pedagogical terms, and in terms of the textual architectures of that classroom, the relationship of learners to knowledge and learners to teachers and learners to each other, nothing necessarily changes at all. So people think, oh, it's great, we're doing all this technology in school, but it may well be exactly a reproduction of the relationships of text and knowledge that were to be found in that little school that I just showed you. These are old pedagogies brought back to life. So they mimic the traditional classroom. So what might we do which is different? So here what we've done is we've kind of created an alternative model, and you can see here the teacher is still incredibly important, but the teacher actually has a different job. The teacher is actually on about building these reflexive relationships, including structured peer-to-peer relationships. So how do we build the classroom as a knowledge community? How do we build the classroom as a place where students are interacting with each other, but not in a chaotic way? I mean, the scaffolding of those relationships becomes very, very important. And in fact, one of the ironies of this is that these are actually old ideas. You know, they're education. Hello, we've just gone off. These are old educational ideas which have been around for a long, long time. 18th century, if you want to start with Rousseau. The idea of active learning, collaborative learning, problem solving, intellectual risk taking, all of those things are discouraged both in the didactic school and by a lot of these darn technologies that have turned up. So, now that says so technology is pedagogically neutral, doesn't do anything necessarily, but it has affordances. That's moving on very slowly. It has affordances. So this word affordance means we might be able to do some interesting new things, and what are they? And Mary and I have developed a kind of a shopping list, a checklist, if you like, of 7 things which can be different. So nothing's necessarily different, but how could it be different? And these are the 7 things. We've just published this chapter in a book which summarises what I'm about to say from now on. So these are 7 things which could be different about new educational environments. Now, in fact, every one of those things is quite an old aspiration. John Dewey or Maria Montessori, well, they were all saying this stuff a long time ago. But what technology does is makes it more practicable. It makes it more possible, makes it more practicable. And here is a version of this same thing as a kind of a summary and a checklist. Now, what I'm going to do now is I've got 2 more little bits I'm going to do in this talk, and I think I've got enough time to do it. I'm going to take you into some examples, live examples on the web of kids' work, and then what I'm going to do is go through these 7 ideas and try to interpret what's going on, but in fact, I'm going to not do that much interpretation. I'm going to let the kids do the interpreting for you. So I'm going to jump out of here now and go onto the web and show you some, to give you a sense of what the environment's like and what we've been doing. So I'll go escape there. And what I'm going to do over here is pull this up. That's the wrong, it's not that one, it's this one. So this is this environment that we've built that's called Scholar. And in fact, if you want to go, this is mostly open to the web. There's bits of it which are closed. You can ask to get into the whole lot of it if you want to. And what this is it's a web-based writing environment. But actually, one of our arguments, going back to our old learning language across the curriculum days, writing is actually everything. Writing is stuff you do in science, writing stuff you do in history, and there's a lot more writing to be done if we're to be active knowledge producers in these kinds of spaces. So I'm going to take you into, there are 5 spaces here, but I'm going to just take you very briefly into several of them. So when I first log in as a student, and this is what I did this morning, as I went in and logged in as other people so you could see real accounts. This is actually an actual student in a classroom here, and she belongs to various communities which her classes. She has peers, so it's not the classroom, a classical classroom discourse. And as you go down her activity stream, you see stuff that's happening in her world. People who are doing things. Oh, it's actually, it won't scroll on because it's logged me out. This is just simply, I logged into this earlier today. So here we are. This is her world. And by the way, over here are her publications. What she's done is she's written a piece about Thomas Edison, an argumentative essay. They're just the most recent 4 publications. And when we click on that, we can see her whole profile. I'm going to show you an example of them in a moment. So this is in this space called community. And when I go into one of the communities, this is now a school, and we'll see some of these kids and their teacher speaking in a video in a few minutes. We go into a community now, and looking just at the one community, this is the activity that's going on. classroom discussions which go on, an infinite scroll that go on forever, classroom discussions going on. And here I'm going to go into one of those discussions now where the teacher has put, write a reaction to the play Stargirl, using the @name, comment on 2 or 3 learners' reactions. And you can see here, here's a classroom discussion going on. And it goes on and on and on. Now, in fact, this is, this particular school, in this community, there are 119 members. So, in fact, this is a school which is the whole of, it's actually 2 integrated grades in an open space. So the reason why we use the community, not class, is these things are becoming very fluid. So these are, you know, it might be small communities that are working together on things, or large communities. I'm going to come back. I just want to show you what it looks like and then make some generalizations about how this is incredibly different from conventional classroom discourse. I'm going to come back and make that in a moment, but I just want you to see what's happening here. Now, I'm going to take you to the next space. So community is where you do classroom discussions. It's like Facebook, it's like Twitter, it's like a discussion board, and it's different in some important ways as well. We've been lucky enough to be able to design this from the ground up, and the story of how it's different and why it has to be different from those things is another story, an important one, but another story. I'm going to take you to the next space now called Creator, and this is a multimodal writing space. So this is somebody writing the story behind the bus, which is the whole Rosa Parks story. And you can see here what they've done is they've included media, they've included links, and so on in their work. And this then becomes something that's published to the web. Now, in fact, in this space, you can put in, apropos of multimodality, you can put in audio, you can put in video, you can put in image, you can link to the web. So one of the things we need in these complex multimodal writing spaces in the future is the ability to write in genuinely multimodal ways, and we need that for the business of what we call knowledge representation. So if I'm doing a science experiment, I write up what the objectives are or what the hypotheses are, I pull out my phone and take a little video, I put in a data set, which might be an Excel spreadsheet, because I can put a data set inline as well. So in any subject, writing then becomes important. The way in which, look, you know, if I'm doing science, I can have an A, B, C, D answer, which tells you what I've remembered. But in fact, if I'm to understand how you're operating as a scientist, the business of writing becomes the business of knowledge representation. And we need these kinds of multimodal tools to do that. So you'll see here that what there are a number of versions here, but also what we've built in is we've built this as a very social writing space. So here we are now, and in the feedback area, we have a number of different forms of feedback going on. So while the reviews, annotations, recommendations, we have a checker, which is sort of not a grammar and spell checker. It does more than that and less than that. And here what we have is we have a rubric which has been constructed by the teacher or published by another teacher and shared by another teacher. So while the student's writing, they see the rubric there on the right. Then they get to review several other students' pieces of work. So this is how I do a review. Here's what the explanation is of, you know, a 2 or a 3. I go submit. And in fact, for this particular piece of work, here's the results. After the reviews were finished, this is what one student said to another around those review criteria. This is what another student said to another about those criteria. So 3 lots of comments, and it can be anonymous. So what we have, which is very different from that traditional classroom, we've got students as active knowledge makers. They're not reading chapter 7 of the book, they're writing chapter 7. And what we've got is formative interim assessment, where we're empowering the students to assess each other along the way. Now, in fact, the rubric on the right is based on the US Common Core standards, but we've built this for the students in order for them to give constructive advice to each other. So what we have is a kind of a play between the left-hand side, which is doing the work, and the right-hand side, which is metacognitive work. And it goes backwards and forwards. I write my draft, I see the rubric. I look at somebody else's work, and I write a review. I get my work back, and I look at the comments. I revise it, and perhaps I write a self-review at that point. Oh, look, what did I change? You know, so it's this constant reflective process moving between the writing work and thinking about the writing work, which may be stuff thinking about the nature of the text, or it might be thinking about the nature of science, but in fact we're doing writing. So that gives you a little sense of how that space works. Now, when it's finally finished into the portfolio space, this is an example of a publication. See here, this is published out to the web, and it's got, this is the Thomas Edison piece that was mentioned before. It's got a little bit of Mary Had a Little Lamb, the actual audio. It's got images all the way through it, and this is what a 21st century piece of writing looks like. A couple more spaces that I want to show you quickly. This is the analytics space where what we can do is we can dig down deep into the students' work. So here we've got, I don't know, 30, 50 students. And this, for us, is, let me just make a provocative kind of statement. If you have this amount of data, you actually don't need assessment because everything's become assessment. Okay? So here we've got a pile of data, which is the number of versions they wrote, the average version length, percentage version edited, academic language level, which is Flesch, Kincaid and all that funny stuff, average peer review rating, average self-review rating, average teacher review rating, overall rating, number of reviews authored, average reviewed length, number of annotations you made. So this is about 20-something things that have happened through multiple versions, and we give an overall score there, but you can see it's pretty complicated. Green is a standard deviation above the norm, red is a standard deviation below it, and in fact, across all the versions, this kid, there's a couple of 100,000 words here in this writing project in this class, and this gives the teacher a kind of a detailed view of what's going on, and it's possible also to dig down into individual works. These are the changes they made. This is between one version. Oh, page expired. I made a shot of the next version here. So here, and these are then all the reviews that they got, review 1, review 2. So you're getting a lot of feedback. You're crowdsourcing feedback, if you like, and the teacher has more data than ever, and their job, look, we want their job to become easier. Their job becomes easier because they've got this sort of detailed history of all the work that's gone on. So this is, if you like, a kind of an illustration of the universe that we call a big data universe. One last thing that I'll mention before I get in and show you these little examples and little videos is we have a bookstore where we're building things called learning modules, and you can see here a lot of familiar names from the ACT, not only that, which are scaffolded sequences of activity where the students are active learners through that whole process, and we're still very actively engaged with folks here in developing this stuff. So I'm going to go back now to the PowerPoint, which is here, and I'm going to show you some of the students talking. So these 7 affordances, let's see now some students talking about just the classroom discussion space and how it is different. This is a school in, oops, sorry, I need to go back.
So in the classroom, we were all commenting on each other's posts and sharing our opinions and just pretty much saying our opinions on the posts and what we felt was good about what they wrote. And you could just see all the different views from all the different people, and it was really interesting because a lot of people had different views on everything.
People are able to think about what they say before they say it, and when you get that, it's more concise and more thoughtful conversations. You get a better viewpoint of what they actually want to say instead of an in-the-moment kind of feel answer. And when that happens, you get a better understanding of what your classmates think and what you think.
I wrote, my comment was about, I asked Liam if he said that he wanted advertisements to happen about advertising healthier drinks like milk and water and the importance of them. And I asked Liam if he thought they would actually work, because there's a difference between them actually doing it and then it actually working.
I feel like when you're writing stuff down, you can just, instead of speaking, you kind of get jumbled up in your words. And when you're writing down, you get a chance to lay everything out and see it in front of you. So you can kind of have everything planned out so you can make it perfect instead of having all the little mistakes that you make when you're speaking.
I could be sitting next to someone and we're not even looking face to face, but I can know everything that they're saying. And to have everyone be able to do it at once instead of just having one person.
I'll stop there. That gives you a bit of a flavour of it. Now, let me just say this. Courtney Kasdan has this book, which a lot of you may know, called Classroom Discourse, classic book. And this is what Classroom Discourse was in that little classroom where we were doing volcanoes, okay? Initiate, respond, evaluate. Hey, kids, what's that stuff that comes out of volcanoes? And you all put your hands up, and the answer is lava, because one person has to give an answer which is a proxy for everybody else in the classroom, and they have to try and guess what the right answer is because that's what's expected. And then I, as a teacher, evaluate and I say, yes, that's right. So that's classical classroom discourse. Now, this that we just saw in community, that classroom discourse, is actually both the same thing and profoundly different. And these kids capture a little bit about what's different. Firstly, my theory of the person who puts up their hand to answer is always the wrong person, right? But in this environment, everybody answers. And when they answer, the answers are all slightly different and they start talking to each other, so difference comes out. And also, just that moment of taking a little while to think. When I go down to the bottom and when I go to put a comment, before I press the comment button, I've got a few seconds to think. So even if it's live in the classroom, as it was in that particular case, you have time to think, but also you're on a journey away from oral language into written language. That's also different from classroom discourse. So there are a lot of things about this which are profoundly different. The other thing that's profoundly different is there also is no difference now between being in the class in person doing this and doing it overnight, doing it at home, doing it outside online. So that's the ubiquitous learning concept there. The next concept is active knowledge making. So this is how we might do volcanoes differently.
Tell me, what are you writing about?
Cats.
And why did you choose to write about cats?
Because they're interesting.
And tell me something interesting you found out about cats.
That cats can jump.
I'm going to jump on.
When I assign the
Amazing praying animals.
when I assigned the first assignment of I did Incredible Animals, so it gave them the picture and then a story about the first incredible animal to start thinking about, and then the next assignment to dive deeper and then to go in and research on the internet.
And where did you get that information from?
www.500factsaboutcheetah.
And where are you getting the information from?
On Lizard Fun Fact.
And where did you get the facts from?
Okay, I'm going to jump on. Active knowledge making. Instead of reading about volcanoes, you do the volcanoes project. Find a volcano you like, find videos on the web, draw a diagram which shows the structure of a volcano and what's happening structurally in a volcano from a physical geography point of view. Read other people's projects, and against the rubric you have physical geography criteria and writing criteria about how well represented that knowledge was. Assess each other. So the students are then repositioned as active knowledge makers. Multimodal meaning is the next point. So what we saw there in that editor is an example of
kids in our age,
multimodal writing space.
Technology is everything to them. It gets us to do something better than just doing the writing on the paper and pencil. Because when you're writing on paper and pencil, you might not put forth your best effort, but when you're on here, you're on something you like, something you enjoy doing.
You could use different tools and stuff that we're not able to use on paper. A lot. Technology was a big help and everything.
I'm racing on because I'm conscious that I don't have many minutes left. But just to give you a flavour of this. So expanded tools for knowledge representation, these learner-generated pieces of multimodal writing. Recursive feedback. What our ambition in this space is, there is no distinction between formative and summative assessment. In fact, you don't need summative assessments. Everything's formative. Summative is when I go back and look at what's happened in that progress dashboard. And there is no distinction between teaching and learning and assessment. So our provocative kind of proposal is, let's abolish the tests, because we have all this data about everything that happens all the time, and every piece of data must be, I'll use a technical phrase, semantically legible. So the kid has to understand every single bit of micro feedback, be it a piece of peer feedback, be it a natural language processing checker which suggests a different language term, be it annotation inside the text. We have about 4 or 5 of these different types of feedback system in the writing space, and then you've got so much data you don't need tests. So this is our kind of ambition in this space.
Peer-to-peer feedback is like nothing else, because you have someone's work in front of you and you probably don't know whose it is, and it doesn't matter, because all that really matters is what they have evidence of in that place, and then the rubric, the things that we're kind of looking at and assessing them on.
We usually interact with a lot more, because since it's online, it isn't as awkward meeting someone for the first time, and you have something to talk about and meet meet new people since you guys are both working.
Beauty with Scholar is that they don't know who you are or who's the one reviewing, and by giving this constructive feedback, sometimes I go home and I talk to my dad, I'm like, oh, I'm not getting very good feedback because they know who I am, or they're kind of.
So I'll stop there. You get a bit of a flavour of it. Here in this thing about recursive feedback is, you know, we're getting a lot of feedback all the time. And by the way, the job of the teacher actually, you know, after a while, the kids give each other so many comments, there's not much else to say, to be quite frank. But also the classic, you know, hand in the thing at the end and the answer's B+ and a few cursory comments. What we're doing all the time is assessment. And by the way, what we're doing all the time are the classic techniques of workshop writing, to be quite frank, and process writing. That's what we're doing. We're building this collaborative knowledge environment where we're giving each other actually textual suggestions is what they are, no matter what subject it is that we're doing. Collaborative intelligence. What happens when you do a good piece of work? It's not just your piece of work. It's not stuff you've remembered. It's stuff you've looked up. It's stuff you've been able to source on the internet. You'll be able to cite. You don't have to remember it. It's what you can fabricate as stuff which is part of the social collaborative, the social collective, but also your peers are giving you a lot of feedback, and if your work is a good piece of work, it's partly because of that.
Peer editing piece, I think, is one of the most important parts of Scholar, as the feedback is very important for the students. They look at a piece of writing and they're able to give constructive feedback instead of just saying good job.
So, collaborative intelligence is not just the stuff that's in your head, it's the stuff that you'll be able to source and the stuff that the class as a community has worked on each other with. And by the way, we can see the provenance of everything. We can see your first version. We can see the comments you've been given. We can ask you to comment on the comments. That was really helpful, and I took on board this person's comment. So in other words, we can actually see the social construction of the text, the social construction of the knowledge going on. Metacognition. So, on the screen, we've got the work on the left, social dialogue about the work on the right. We've got cognition on the left, metacognition on the right, and the play backwards and forwards all the time. Oops.
I think some of the feedback tools that are part of the creator space have really, really been helpful for students. And I think that process of metacognition that occurs when they're looking at a rubric I've designed and they're giving feedback to each other. And
so, metacognitive moments, disciplinary thinking, if you like. Instead of you learning about volcanoes, you're becoming a physical geographer or a scientist. Last point, differentiated learning, and then I'm done. You know, watching the differences. Remember that big spreadsheet? Complicated differences. When you see the greens and the reds all over the sheet, and by the way, you can run this on the fly anytime, during the class, halfway through the class, the end of the project, whenever. There are warning signs that come up which you might not have seen. Remember that little girl that put up her head in the classroom? You didn't know whether she was daydreaming or on task. Well, we can see more into what students are doing than we ever could in the past.
We know as teachers that we have to meet our kids at where they're at and let the kids have some more reign and voice in their learning.
We're talking about how people are either student and self-driven and can work by themselves, or are teacher-driven, and Scholar allows both of those kinds of people to work together and both achieve their goals.
So, collaborative, oh, sorry, I just, sorry, that's got the wrong heading. It should be not collaborative intelligence, but differentiated instruction. Not everybody has to be on the same page, and there can be a lot of you know, differences that have become visible in student speaking, but in terms of, you know, watching which students are aware at any one moment. This is our kind of model, if you like. There's a lot of interaction going on in this space, the community space, and then this creator and publisher space, and the analytics then is the kind of the center of it. So to end now, what we've done is this is our 7 affordances down the right. This is what didactic pedagogy was like on the left. You know, to what extent can we reach these goals? As you've just seen, that we've tried in a practical kind of way to do this in this work that Mary and I have been doing over the last few years. And just as a kind of a conclusion, we've always aspired to do this in education. We're not saying anything that's new to any of you. It's just that these kind of environments make it practicable in a way that it wasn't in the past. These are some things that Mary and I have been writing lately. The most recent one's up there on the right. We're just now doing a new edition of this literacies book. But please join us on the web. We have a New Learning Facebook page and a Twitter feed, but in fact, it feeds out of Scholar. So Scholar does feeds out to Facebook and Twitter. It's on a sort of a level playing field with them. So if you go into Scholar, set up an account and ask to join the New Learning community, ask to become our peers, you'll see stuff going on in the world. So if anybody's interested that's our website about the things we're doing. There are our email addresses, and we would very much welcome to have you as, well, we have a lot of you already as fellow travellers and collaborators, and if anyone else would like to become part of that, you would be very welcome. And I'm only a couple of minutes over time, that's not bad. And we've got a fireside chat, which we're going to need the fire turned up today, I think, yeah. And you've got to promise there will be a fire there. No. We've got a fireside chat this afternoon at 4:30 if you aren't completely worded and texted out by then. Thanks very much.
It really would be tremendous if we had time for discussion now, but as Bill says, last thing this afternoon after afternoon tea, there's that fireside chat session to explore some more of this, what I suggest has been an exhilarating look into what is now possible with some of the affordances of technology now available. So on your behalf, ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause, please, and thank you very much. And